The battle in Seattle is set for December 7th between Gonzaga and a new-look Kentucky roster. Can the Zags make it 3 wins in a row over the Wildcats?
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Tuesday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode of Locked On Zags is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. As the playoffs wind down, the sports stop sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus every single day. That's right. There's something for everybody every day, all summer long. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon now to get started. Well, Rasir Bolton has a new home. Sad update on Courtney Vandersloot. We're also going to talk about some non-basketball Zag updates. All that coming up on today's show. But first, we lead after the press release came out by Gonzaga that the battle in Seattle is officially set between Gonzaga and Kentucky December 7th. The game will take place at the Climate Pledge Arena. The time for the game, the TV information for the game, still to be determined. This may not sound like a new update, and in fact, it's not. It's not much of a new update. We had heard previously reported that this game was scheduled to be on December 7th. We knew a long time ago that it was going to be played at the Climate Pledge Arena. It's part, of course, of that 6-year series that was agreed to by Mark Few and former Kentucky coach John Calipari. So it's not like we didn't know this game was going to be at Climate Pledge. We'd found out again earlier that it was going to be December 7th. We still don't know the time. We still don't know the TV information. We do know that tickets are going on sale on June 28th. So 3 days from now, for whenever you're listening to this show right now, the tickets will be available starting at 10 a.m. Pacific time on the Climate Pledge Arena website. If you are I believe season ticket holders can get tickets a little bit earlier. I think it's on the 26th that they're able to get them. But the press release confirms the date of the game, and it confirmed that it's part of the battle in Seattle. And I think that that's somewhat interesting. Gonzaga has played games at the Climate Pledge Arena that were not part of the storied history of battle in Seattle. In fact, last year's loss to UConn was part of the Continental Tire main event and was not considered a game in the battle in Seattle. Again, like I said, it's part of a 6-year series between Gonzaga and Kentucky. The series started in 2022 when Gonzaga hosted Kentucky at the Spokane Arena, won that game 88-72. The next year was this past season. Gonzaga played Kentucky at Rupp Arena. Again, the first home game for Gonzaga was at the Spokane Arena, not their home arena. The first home game for Kentucky was at their actual home court. There was a lot of discussion, a lot of kerfuffle about this when it first happened, but Mark Few and the Zags, as they so often do, they just tuned it all out. And they said, we'll beat you at the Spokane Arena, and we'll go to Rupp Arena, and we'll beat you there too. And that's exactly what they did in February of this past year. Beat Kentucky 89-85. I kind of forgot how close the final score was. Kentucky went on a little run in the middle of the second half, but Gonzaga really kind of put the doors on them and held them off for the majority of that game. Kentucky, not a good defensive team. Gonzaga, of course, hung 89 on them. Fantastic performances. That was when we really started to see Ryan Nembhard start to utilize that short pick and roll, and Kentucky just could not find a way to stop it. The future of the series, the game will be in Nashville in the 25-26 season. That's going to be a really fun opportunity for folks to travel and see that team in a fun, cool city. The game will be at Rupp Arena again in the 26-27 season. And finally, in the 2027-28 season, that is when Kentucky will come to the McCarthy Athletic Center and face the Zags at the Kennel. Gonzaga right now 2-1 all time against Kentucky. Of course, they've won the last 2 games as part of this 6-year series. Before that, they lost to Kentucky in the 2002 Maui Invitational 80-72. So Kentucky looking to get an even score against Gonzaga in their matchups. Gonzaga looking to win their 3rd straight against the Wildcats. And now their first one against Mark Pope, the former BYU head coach, who is now the head coach of the Kentucky Wildcats. It's been an insane offseason in Lexington, one of the craziest college coaching cycles of all time, not just in college basketball, of course, where we have a vacancy at Kentucky, a vacancy at Arkansas, a vacancy at Louisville, a vacancy at USC. That doesn't happen very often all in one season. We tack Michigan and a handful of other big-time programs on there as well. You also had Nick Saban departing Alabama, which caused a huge situation in college football. It's been an insane insane coaching carousel in college athletics. Danny Hurley almost made it even more insane, but decided to stay at UConn. Regardless, Mark Pope takes over at Kentucky as John Calipari leaves Kentucky to go to Arkansas to take over the head coach job there. Not a single scholarship player from last year's Kentucky roster is back. Every player that we watched Gonzaga beat last year is gone. 3 of them are going to hear their name called in the NBA draft on Wednesday or Thursday, depending where Justin Edwards goes. The other 2 guys, Reed Shepherd, Rob Dillingham, they're going to be in the first round almost certainly. A handful of guys have transferred. 3 of them transferred to Arkansas to follow Coach John Calipari, including DJ Wagner, including Zvonimir Ivisic, the big man, including Adu Thiero. Oganan Yensos transferred to Kansas State. This is a completely new look roster. And folks, I know that there's a lot of chuckling, a lot of laughing at the fact that Mark Pope, a coach who truly finished 5th in the WCC 2 years ago, went to the Big 12, led BYU to an NCAA tournament. They lost in the first round, and now he's the head coach at Kentucky, a coach who has not won an NCAA tournament game, a coach who didn't have the success in the WCC at BYU that was expected of that program when they joined the conference. They kind of thought they were going to come in and just dominate and kind of replace Gonzaga. That never happened for BYU. So I get that. I get that conversation. But I think Mark Pope's going to do really good things at Kentucky. I'm not sure if it's going to happen this year. And the fact that this game is in early December as opposed to being in February like it was last year. The game being in February last year was a good advantage for Gonzaga. It, in theory, should have been a good advantage for Kentucky. That team was very young, tons of freshmen. I think the expectation for Cal and company was, hey, this is a good opportunity for us to pick up a marquee game in the middle of SEC play, and we're going to be more ready for the Zags. We're going to be more ready for Mark Few because our freshmen will have developed and grown. In reality, Kentucky's team kind of stagnated last year. I think some of that was coaching, if we're being completely honest, whereas Gonzaga steadily improved throughout the year as transfers Ryan Nembhard and Graham Ike got more comfortable with their roles, as Mark Few made a starting lineup adjustment to bring Ben Gregg in for Dusty Stromer. Starting lineup adjustment is something that probably could have helped Kentucky quite a bit, as their 2 lottery picks, projected lottery picks, were both coming off the bench all of last year, but they didn't make that change. Mark Few made changes. They got that big victory. Looking ahead to this year, I think the advantage once again resides with Gonzaga in terms of this being an early season game. The best case scenario for Gonzaga with regards to this game is they pick up a win. Ideally, it's a commanding win. The larger margin of victory helps in terms of net ranking and helps in terms of KenPom and all the stuff that goes into the computer metrics and making sure you get the best seed and all that good stuff. But what I think /hope /kind of expect to happen is that this Kentucky team is going to be better at the end of the year than they are at the beginning of the year. Partly because I do think Mark Pope is a good coach. I think Mark Pope is a coach willing to make adjustments, something that did not happen under the previous regime at Kentucky. And this roster is completely new. None of these guys have played together. To get your team cohesive enough to be able to beat a team like Gonzaga that returns 4 or 5 starters, that returns 7 of 8 key rotation pieces, that brings in veteran guys like Khalif Battle, like Michael Ajayi, brings back a Steele Venters who's new in terms of being on the floor, but not new to the system. To beat a team like that, you have to be very good, which I think the talent on Kentucky's roster is good. I don't think it's better than Gonzaga's, but it's good. But you also have to be really consistent and ready with your sets and prepared. And I just have a hard time seeing a team that is just now getting their pieces together, that's just now starting practices, that hasn't played together in a game situation and won't until about a month before that game. It's hard for me to imagine that team is ready to roll and ready to beat a team like Gonzaga. But are they going to be really good in February? It wouldn't shock me. It would not shock me if this team is really good in February, even into March. And for Gonzaga, that is great. Because when folks are starting to look at Gonzaga's resume, they're going to see that they picked up in a 15, 18, 20-point win over Kentucky. Again, in a best-case scenario here. And maybe Kentucky was 61st. That probably won't be that low. 49th in the net when that game happened. But now they're 23rd. And Gonzaga beat them by 15 points. That's what I envision as a potential, fairly likely scenario that could come out of this game and could be really advantageous for Gonzaga going into the season. I'm going to rattle off Kentucky's new roster here very quickly. Then we're going to move on, talk about some former Zags and what's going on with them. Point guard position, deepest spot for Kentucky, unquestionably. They get Kirk Kriisa from West Virginia, former Arizona guard, talented player. Bit of a polarizing player, but he's a good three-point shooter, had a good year last year for the Mountaineers. Lamont Butler, hit that huge shot to send San Diego State to the national championship game 2 seasons ago over Florida Atlantic. Very good defensive guard. They have an incoming freshman from the state of Kentucky, Travis Perry, rounding out the point guard position. Combo guard or shooting guard position, Kobe Brea, transfer from Dayton, one of the best three-point shooters in the entire country last year, unquestionably. Colin Chandler, a BYU decommit, a player who's been on his Mormon mission the last couple of years, so he's an older freshman, highly regarded kid coming over to Lexington to join Mark Pope's team. Small forward Jackson Robinson, the biggest player they got from BYU, guy who was in the NBA draft process until pulling out at the last minute. He's probably going to be Kentucky's leading scorer this season. They get a transfer from Oklahoma, Otega Owe. They also have another incoming freshman, Trent Noah, who can play the 3. Front court is probably their weakest position just in terms of depth. Andrew Carr from Wake Forest is going to start at the 4. Brandon Garrison from Oklahoma State is going to start at the 5. They have Drexel big Amari Williams coming off the bench, as well as Fairleigh Dickinson center Ansley Almanor. I think this team's going to be okay. I don't think they're going to be great. I think they're going to be solid. And I think Gonzaga is going to pick up a win against them that's going to age well as the season goes on. Folks, we're going to move on. We're going to talk about some former Zags. We're going to talk about Rasir Bolton, who had a dominant first professional season overseas. That led to a new contract in a new league. And more on that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, FanDuel. The NBA season is over. NHL, as you're listening to this, has just wrapped up Game 7 tonight as I'm recording on Monday. But baseball, it's in full swing. WNBA is in full swing. And FanDuel is your place to bet on every single game, because right now new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. So bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all in an app that is safe, secure, and super easy to use. And if you're looking for some future odds, Gonzaga plus 2,000 right now to win the 2025 national championship. Those odds are getting worse for a voter. So if you want to maximize your potential, maximize your odds, get the biggest winnings for watching the Zags cut down the nets in 2025, then what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon right now and make your first bet an automatic W. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, folks, segment 2, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, and we are spending the rest of the show talking about former Zags, but not basketball players. Final segment is not basketball players. Here we're talking one former men's basketball player, Rasir Bolton. We're also talking about Courtney Vandersloot. We'll start with Bolton because he recently signed a new contract with MMK Spartak Subotica. They are known as the Spartak Office Shoes, which is a hilarious team name. They are in Serbia. They played last season in the NLB ABA, which is the second tier division of the ABA, the Adriatic Basketball Association. It is one of the top professional basketball leagues that is not the NBA, that is not the EuroLeague. ABA is high-level basketball. And this club, the Serbian club, played at the second level last year. However, they won the league last year. So they're going to be promoted. So Bolton is moving over to the top league in the ABA. I think that's the key here. He's not just moving over to the second tier league. He is actually going to be on a team that is getting that bump, that is going to play at the highest level in the ABA. He spent last season with the Antwerp Giants in the BNTX League, which is the top league in Belgium. He was an MVP finalist as a rookie with this Giants team. In 28 games last year, Rasir Bolton averaged 17.7 points, 3.5 boards, 2.5 assists, and a little over 1 steal per game. He played 28 games. The team went 21-7 when he was on the floor, and they finished second in the division. Bolton, of course, very successful 2-year career at Gonzaga, started his career at Penn State, transferred to Iowa State, spent a couple of years with the Cyclones when they were very, very bad. They have obviously rebounded in a significant way since then. Averaged 10.5 points for Gonzaga, about 2.4 assists, 2.2 boards, was a prolific three-point shooter at 42.5%. Very, very fun to see him succeed, moving up the ranks to start out in the Belgian league to now be moving to the ABA at the highest level with this new Serbian club. Very excited to see his continued progression in his professional basketball career. We'll transition to a sadder topic. Many of you saw this over the weekend, or those of you who follow the WNBA probably been in on this a little bit sooner. Courtney Vandersloot has not played in, I believe, the Liberty's last 7 games now. I saw an article at the Spokesman Review that said she'd been out for 6 games. I believe they've played at least one more game since then, so she's missed 6, 7, maybe even 8 games so far this season. That was always labeled as for personal reasons. Unfortunately, the update is that Courtney's mother, Jan, passed away after a 2-year battle with cancer. For those of you who follow Courtney on Instagram, you know she's done a lot of charity work, some bike rides to raise money, to raise awareness for cancer research. This is why. This is the reasoning here. Obviously, incredibly sad for anybody to lose a parent at a young age. Courtney's, I think, 35. Way too young to be losing a parent. It's incredibly unfortunate for her. Like I said, she's missed the majority, about half of the season so far for the Liberty. The WNBA season is very condensed this year because of the Olympics, so a lot of games are being played early in the year. So for Courtney, she hasn't been out that long, but there's been a lot of games in that period of time, unfortunately. Some nice quotes in support by some of her teammates. Jonquel Jones, who's having a fantastic season for the Liberty, said, I quote, "I think it just goes to show that we're a family, and as much as we love basketball and we understand that it's a business and it's our jobs and everything, it kind of makes you put things into perspective and understand there's a lot of other things going on in life." Courtney's teammate and fellow point guard Sabrina Ionescu said something similar. "We've been playing for her a lot of our games now, and obviously she's a big part of our team." And yeah, it's unfortunate for Courtney. I'm excited to see her get back on the court, continue her quest to break Sue Bird's record and become the WNBA's all-time assists leader. She's currently she began the season, 534 assists behind Sue Bird. It was going to take 2 full seasons of like 6+ assists per game. Courtney's played 9 games so far this season with the Liberty. She's averaging 5.3 assists. So she's fairly on track, but obviously she has now missed quite a few games. That is not the important part of this conversation. That is not, the main takeaway here. I am still hopeful and optimistic and excited to see if she can break Sue Bird's record, become the WNBA's all-time assist leader. But right now, the focus is, of course, on being with her family and taking care of herself mentally to get ready to get back onto the floor. Very difficult to do as I'm recording this right now. There's no indication as to when she's going to return to the floor. I'm assuming the Liberty are being very are allowing her to take the time that she needs, that she feels she needs to get back on the floor. But hopefully she will feel ready to get back on the floor soon, because I love getting a chance to check out the WNBA, and getting to watch Liberty games is always the easiest way to do so, because I get to see a former Zag player in Vandersloot. So I'm hoping to see her back on the floor soon, but of course hoping more than anything else that she takes care of herself and returns not a minute before she is actually ready to be back on the floor. Well, folks, we're going to close out the show today talking about a pair of Gonzaga athletes who competed at the Olympic trials in the 10,000 meter. We're going to talk about how they did and take a look at a trio of Zags playing in the MLB this season. All that to close out the show, coming up in just a second. But first, I want to tell you all about today's sponsor, eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience. That's the formula for winning championships, and it's also what helps keep your ride or die alive. And eBay Motors has everything that you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits to LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. And with over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. Plus, with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and take home that W. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only, exclusions apply, and eBay's Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, folks, segment 3, still Andy Patton, still Locked On Zags podcast, closing out the show today, talking about some former Zags, like I said before, who are not basketball players. We're going to start talking about the track and field athletes. The 10,000 meter Olympic trials just took place a few days ago. We know the athletes who are going to represent the United States at the Olympics in Paris, France this summer. Unfortunately, the 2 Zags who were competing in this event did not place in the top 3, which is what they would have needed to do in order to be Olympians this upcoming season. Junior Will Smith, who is, again, junior at Gonzaga. He is currently a student with the Bulldogs right now, finished 13th in the 10,000 meter Olympic trials. 1 spot ahead of him in 12th place was James Mora. We talked about him a little bit last year on the podcast. He was one of the most prolific track and field student athletes in Gonzaga history, if not the most prolific. Tons of awards, tons of medals, tons of success. Legitimately an incredibly prolific student athlete for the Gonzaga Bulldogs. The Zags had 2 athletes placed in the top 15 of the 10,000 meter Olympic trials. That is a testament to this program's development, to this program's success. It's also a sign of growth in the WCC, because Woody Kincaid was one of the three athletes who finished high enough to make it to the 10,000, to make it to the Olympics in the 10,000 meters. Woody Kincaid is an alumni of the University of Portland. In fact, I worked at UP with the track team specifically when Woody Kincaid was a student athlete. So seeing him now be an Olympian is an incredibly cool moment for me personally. It's a great moment for the University of Portland that doesn't generally generate as many professional athletes or Olympic athletes as, a program like Gonzaga might do. It's a huge deal for Portland. It's a huge deal for the pilots. It's a huge deal for Woody, and it's a big deal for the WCC. They had a student athlete who's now going to be an Olympian. Gonzaga had 2 people placed in the top 15. Track and field in this conference is at a really high level right now. It's very cool to see Gonzaga student athletes thriving outside of just men's and women's basketball. And I want to talk about baseball now to close out the show, because baseball, it was a up and down season. Let's put it that way. Last year, they had a lot of new pieces, a lot of young players. I think they're still navigating the changes in the transfer portal and how it impacts baseball, which is different in a lot of ways, just because baseball is having a harder time generating revenue to be able to sign student athletes with NIL money. And of course, there's many more student athletes on a baseball roster than there are for basketball. So we saw some ups and downs last year for Gonzaga, but the history for Gonzaga baseball has been very excellent in the last 2 decades or so. And we've seen a lot of players not only get drafted and go through the minor league system, but make it all the way up to the big leagues. So far, in the early part of the baseball season, the professional baseball season, the Zags have had 3 alumni play in the major leagues. One of them is Marco Gonzalez. Marco Gonzalez now with the Pittsburgh Pirates, spent the last 6 years with the Seattle Mariners, was a first-round pick back in 2013 out of Gonzaga. He only played 3 games so far for Pittsburgh. Unfortunately, he is currently on the injured list with a forearm strain. If you follow baseball at all, you know that a forearm strain is often a precursor to a far more serious injury. We hope that this is not an elbow injury for Marco Gonzalez. It could be Tommy John surgery, which takes you out for about 15 to 18 months. That would be very devastating for a baseball player over the age of 30, the way that Marco is. He was very good in the 3 games that he did play with Pittsburgh this year. 17 total innings, 2.65 ERA, 1.17 whip, had 11 strikeouts and 5 walks. But right now, the concern is his health. Hopefully he can get back healthy, can recover from this injury, and finish out the season with Pittsburgh and continue what has been a remarkably successful career for Gonzalez over the last decade. Sticking on the pitching side, Eli Morgan pitches for the Cleveland Guardians. He's also on the injured list. Folks, it's a tough year to be a pitcher. There is so many injuries in baseball. There's a lot of reasons for it. We're not going to get all the way into it right now, but it is unfortunate to see the amount of injuries happening in this sport. And again, highlighted by the fact that the 2 pitchers who are in the major leagues from the university or from Gonzaga University are both currently on the injured list. Morgan has played 10 games with Cleveland. He's a middle reliever, which means he usually throws about 1 inning per game. So in 10 games, he has thrown 11 total innings, 1.64 ERA, which is tremendous, 1.18 whip, also tremendous, 7 strikeouts, 5 walks. But again, it's only 11 innings. Morgan has been an effective middle reliever for Cleveland since the 2022 season, hoping to see him continue to have that success, come back from this injury, and pitch well for the Guardians down the stretch. Last but not least, Brett Harris. We talked about Brett Harris a few weeks ago when he made his major league debut as a third baseman coming up through the Oakland Athletics system. I believe he was a 7th-round pick by Oakland back in, I think, 2017, something around there, 2018 perhaps. He came up, he played 17 games for Oakland back in May. He has been sent back down to AAA, which is where he resides currently. He's not currently on the Oakland A's roster. Part of that is because he didn't hit all that well, unfortunately, when he was promoted. Had a 116 batting average, had a much more palatable 291 OBP, 326 slugging. He did hit 3 home runs. He had 5 total hits in the big leagues. 3 of them were home runs. 2 of them were on the same day. One of his first games in the big leagues, he popped a pair of home runs. It was very cool to see that happen for Harris. Unfortunately, the rest of his time in the major leagues wasn't all of that successful. I'm recording this on the 24th. It is currently Brett Harris's birthday as you're listening to this. It is the day after his 26th birthday, but I wanted to give a belated happy birthday to Brett Harris. Looking forward to seeing him back in the big leagues before the season is up. Going to wrap it up for me today here on Locked On Zags. We'll be back on Wednesday. That is NBA Draft Day. We will have a guest on the show breaking down Anton Watson's draft profile, where he could go, where he should go. We're also going to talk about Jonathan Mobo a little bit, Jalen Wells from Washington State. We'll talk about the current Gonzaga roster, which players might be drafted in the NBA in the future, what we think about Michael Ajayi and Dusty Stromer and Caliph Battle, and going on and on in that conversation. So look forward to that. Thursday we'll have more, or Friday we'll have more conversation about where Watson lands, where he ends up, all that good stuff coming your way later this week. Thanks again for listening. And until next time, as always, go Zags.